Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Let's be clear about something right from the start. Galactic Station Unity 9 was not prepared for what happened that day. Not even close. And considering this station had survived 3 attempted coups, 2 biological contaminations, and 1 incident involving a drunk Centaurian who somehow managed to vent an entire cargo bay into space while looking for the bathroom, that's saying something. The station itself was a monument to bureaucratic excess and architectural overcompensation. Spanning 32 levels and housing representatives from over 200 species, Unity 9 was where the galaxy came to argue about trade routes, sign treaties nobody intended to honor, and eat overpriced food from vendors who claimed everything was authentic homeworld cuisine, despite the fact that half of it came from the same protein synthesizer in Sub-Level 9. Security Chief Vulnath took pride in running what he considered the tightest operation in 3 sectors. A Qualthian with 4 arms, 6 eyes, and exactly 0 tolerance for nonsense, Vulnath had spent the last 15 cycles making sure every being who stepped foot on Unity 9 was scanned, documented, categorized, and assigned a threat level before they so much as breathed the recycled station air. His security protocols were legendary. His filing system was immaculate. His threat assessment algorithms had been cited in 6 academic journals, and 1 particularly dry textbook that nobody read, but everyone referenced. Today, all of that was about to mean absolutely nothing. The transport shuttle that docked at Bay 19 that morning was unremarkable. Standard diplomatic vessel, human registry, scheduled arrival. Vulnath's lower left hand tapped through the manifest on his datapad, while his upper right hand adjusted the security feed, and his remaining 2 hands gesticulated at his subordinates in what could only be described as aggressive multitasking. "Single occupant," he muttered, scanning the details. "Commander Thomas, human delegation. Routine diplomatic visit. Bioscan incoming and—" The security console erupted in a cacophony of alerts that would have made a less experienced officer weep into their uniform. Every screen in the security hub flashed red. Not the orange of minor concern, or the yellow of potential issue. Red. The kind of red that meant evacuate the sector and pray to whatever deity your species favors. What in the 13 hells? Vulnath's eyes swiveled independently, trying to process 6 different screens at once. Biological scan anomaly. Multiple unknown entities. Threat classification pending. Get me visual confirmation, now. The main view screen shifted to show the docking bay. Commander Thomas stepped off the shuttle first, looking exactly like every other human Vulnath had encountered. Tall, bipedal, wearing that expression of vague amusement that seemed permanently fixed on their faces. The human carried a single bag over one shoulder and appeared completely unbothered by the security sensors that were currently having a collective nervous breakdown. Then came the other passengers. 2 small creatures bounded down the shuttle ramp with the kind of chaotic energy that made Vulnath's primary heart skip a beat. They were clearly juvenile humans, perhaps half the height of the adult, with the same forward-facing predator eyes and the same disturbing tooth configuration that all humans possessed. The female juvenile, her hair pulled back in something humans called a ponytail, immediately veered off toward a decorative sculpture near the bay entrance. The male juvenile, shorter by perhaps 2 inches, and wearing a shirt covered in images of Earth creatures, was already poking at a control panel he absolutely should not have been touching. "B, leave that alone," Thomas called over his shoulder, his tone suggesting this was not the first, 10th, or even 100th time he'd issued such a warning. Vale, get down from there. Neither child obeyed. Volanath's security console was now emitting a sound he'd never heard before. A sustained, high-pitched whine that suggested the system was contemplating early retirement. His subordinates stared at their screens with expressions ranging from confusion to existential dread. "Biological analysis complete," announced Jen, a three-eyed Quellan who served as the station's xenobiology specialist. Her voice had that particular quality of someone delivering news they wished they didn't have to deliver. "Chief, you need to see this." Volnath's four hands moved in perfect synchronization, pulling up the bioscan results on his primary screen. What he saw made his secondary heart consider joining his primary heart in its skippy rhythm. Species: Homo sapiens. Juvenile specimens, estimated 6 standard cycles. Threat assessment: apex predator. Juvenile stage: physical characteristics: binocular forward-facing vision optimized for tracking prey. Omnivorous dentition with pronounced canines designed for tearing flesh. High pain tolerance threshold. Persistence hunting adaptations. Advanced problem-solving capabilities. Pack bonding instincts. Negligible fear response to novel stimuli. Recommended containment protocol. Maximum security facility with redundant barriers. Danger level: 9.3 out of 10. Volnath read it twice, then a third time. Then he seriously considered whether this was some elaborate prank, though Jen had never demonstrated a sense of humor in the 8 cycles they'd worked together. "This can't be right," he said, his voice climbing half an octave. "These are juveniles, offspring. Every species protects their young by keeping them contained, supervised, sedated if necessary. There are protocols, standards, galactic conventions, for crying out loud." As if to punctuate his point, B had now climbed 15 feet up the decorative sculpture and was waving at her father with one hand while clinging to the bronze structure, with her other hand and both feet. Vale had somehow opened the control panel and was poking at the wiring with what appeared to be a toy of some kind. "Commander Thomas," Volnath's voice boomed through the Bay's communication system, all 4 of his hands stabbing at buttons. "Please control your... He struggled to find a diplomatic term for what he was witnessing. "Cubs," Jen supplied helpfully. "Your cubs," Volnath finished. "They are violating no fewer than 16 station safety protocols, and our biological scans indicate they pose a significant security threat." Thomas looked up at the nearest security camera with that infuriatingly calm expression humans seem to wear regardless of circumstance. "Oh, don't worry about B and Vale. They're just kids. Totally harmless." Harmless. The word echoed in Volnath's mind like a bad joke told at a funeral. The security console, still whining like it was contemplating throwing itself out an airlock, suddenly went silent. Every screen flickered once, twice, then displayed a message that Volnath had never seen before in his entire career. "System override. Priority alpha. Do not interfere. Human authorized. All security protocols suspended for designated entities. Clearance level. Autonomous." "What?" Volnath said slowly, each word measured and controlled despite the fact that he wanted to scream, "Does that mean?" Jen's 3 eyes blinked in sequence. That's a station AI override. The governing intelligence has never issued an autonomous clearance before. Not once. Not ever." "Why would it start now?" Volnath demanded, watching B successfully complete her climb, and now sitting atop the sculpture like some kind of tiny, terrifying gargoyle. "Because," Thomas said, having somehow obtained clearance to enter the security hub without Volnath noticing, "the last time your station tried to restrict human movement, We had to save this place from a total reactor meltdown. The council decided it was easier to just let us handle our own business. Vulnath turned all 6 eyes toward the human commander. You're telling me that your species was given blanket autonomous clearance because you performed one rescue operation? Well, Thomas said thoughtfully, it wasn't just one operation. There was also the time we stopped that plague outbreak in the medical wing, and the incident with the Quellan trade delegation, and when we negotiated peace between those 2 species who'd been at war for 60 cycles. But mostly the reactor thing. Yeah. And your solution, Vulnath said, his voice tight, to your offspring being flagged as dangerous predators is to tell me they're harmless and expect me to just accept that? Thomas glanced at the screen showing his children. B was now hanging upside down from the sculpture. Vale had closed the control panel and was attempting to trade his toy with a passing maintenance drone, who looked deeply confused about the whole interaction. Look, Thomas said, I get that this seems weird from your perspective, but humans have been raising kids for a couple 100,000 cycles now. We've got it figured out. They explore, they test boundaries, they occasionally climb things they shouldn't. It's how they learn. Fear and restriction don't help them develop properly. Trust me, they'll be fine. They'll be fine, Vulnath repeated flatly. Sure. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? And there it was. The question that should never, ever be asked on a space station housing 200 different species, half of whom didn't get along, running on technology that was held together with maintenance contracts and hope. Vulnath looked at Thomas. He looked at the screens showing 2 human juveniles who were currently inspiring fear in species that had survived ice ages and extinction events. He looked at the override message that essentially told him his entire security apparatus meant nothing when humans were involved. Then he did what any reasonable security chief would do when faced with circumstances beyond their control and a bureaucracy that had apparently given up on common sense. He reached for his communicator and called an emergency meeting. All senior staff to the security hub. Immediately. We have a situation. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Is this really necessary? They're just kids. Just kids, Vulnath thought. Just kids. As if that phrase somehow negated the fact that the station's biological scanners had classified them as apex predators with danger levels that rivaled some military-grade weaponry. Commander Thomas, Vulnath said, with the kind of patience that comes from cycles of dealing with diplomatic nonsense. With all due respect to your species and your customs, I am responsible for the safety of every being on this station. Your offspring may be just kids to you, but to everyone else, they are unknown variables with threat assessments that suggest we should evacuate 3 decks and implement quarantine procedures. That seems a bit extreme, Thomas said. From the view screen, B's voice crackled through the speakers. Dad, can we get snacks? Vale's hungry, and there's a weird bug alien who says they sell something called crystallized nectar pods. Sure, sweetheart. Just stay in the main concourse and don't wander into any restricted areas. Vulnath's upper right eye twitched. You're letting them roam the station unsupervised? They're 6, not toddlers. They know the rules. Stay together, don't leave the public areas, and come back if there's an emergency. Besides, they've got their comm badges. I can track them anywhere on the station. The security chief's 4 hands moved independently, pulling up tracking data, cross-referencing biological signatures, and updating threat assessment protocols that were quickly becoming useless. Commander, I must insist. Look, Thomas interrupted gently. I appreciate your concern. Really, I do. But B and Vale have been on 6 different stations and 4 planetary colonies in the last 2 cycles. They're experienced travelers. They know how to behave in mixed-species environments. And honestly, trying to restrict them would cause way more problems than just letting them explore. How, Volnath asked, could allowing unsupervised predator juveniles to roam my station possibly cause fewer problems than implementing basic safety protocols? Thomas smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested he'd had this conversation before and knew exactly how it would end. Because human kids are curious, adaptable, and remarkably good at making friends. But if you try to cage them, restrict them, or treat them like threats, they get creative. And trust me, you don't want a bored 6-year-old getting creative on a space station. Before Volnath could respond, his communicator chimed. His senior staff were assembling in the conference room adjacent to the security hub. At least 30 officials from various departments, all wondering why they'd been summoned with such urgency. "We'll continue this discussion later," Volnath said, his tone making it clear this was not a request. "For now, please ensure your offspring remain in public areas and refrain from violating any more station regulations." "Sure thing," Thomas said cheerfully. "They'll be on their best behavior." As the human commander left the security hub, Volnath pulled up the live feed of Bee and Vale once more. They were currently at a vendor stall, enthusiastically gesturing at various colorful items, while the 4-armed Quellan merchant looked like they were reconsidering every life choice that had led them to this moment. Best behavior, Volnath thought grimly. If this was their best behavior, he genuinely feared what their worst might look like. He straightened his uniform, gathered his datapads, and headed toward the conference room. Behind him, the security console continued displaying the override message, its text blinking with bureaucratic indifference. "Do not interfere. Human authorized." Somewhere on the station, 2 human juveniles were about to teach the galaxy a lesson it hadn't asked for, but desperately needed. And Volnath, security chief of Unity 9, paragon of protocol and order, had a sinking feeling that his carefully maintained system was about to encounter its greatest challenge yet. Not warfare, not terrorism, not even another drunk Centaurian. No, something far more terrifying. Unsupervised human children with diplomatic clearance and absolutely no fear of consequences. The universe, Volnath reflected as he walked toward what he suspected would be the most stressful meeting of his career, had a twisted sense of humor. The conference room was packed with more species than Volnath had seen assembled outside of a council summit. His senior staff had brought department heads, who had brought their assistants, who had apparently brought anyone who might have relevant expertise, or just wanted to witness what promised to be spectacular bureaucratic chaos. Volnath stood at the head of the table, 4 hands clasped behind his back, in what he hoped projected authority rather than barely contained panic. The main view screen behind him displayed frozen images from the security feeds. Bee balanced atop the sculpture, Vale poking at the control panel, both children grinning with that particular expression humans wore when they were absolutely delighted with themselves. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Volnath began, his voice steady despite 3 of his hearts beating at what felt like combat tempo. "We have a situation that requires immediate attention and, frankly, expertise beyond my own understanding." Jen pulled up the biological analysis on the secondary screens. Gasps and what might have been quiet prayers rippled through the assembled officials. "These are human juveniles," Volnath continued, "ages approximately 6 standard cycles. They arrived this morning with their father, Commander Thomas, on routine diplomatic business. Our biological scanners flagged them as apex predators with a danger rating of 9.3. 9.3? That came from Tool, a Quellan logistics coordinator whose species was famously risk-averse. That's higher than a Velthian shock trooper. Those are military-grade threat levels. Correct, Vulnath said. And yet, their father insists they are, and I quote, just kids and totally harmless. The room erupted in confused chittering, whistling, and what the universal translator gamely rendered as expressions of disbelief in 18 different languages. Furthermore, Vulnath raised his voice to cut through the noise. The station AI has issued an autonomous clearance override. Human authorized. All security protocols suspended. I have no authority to restrict their movement or activities. That's insane, someone muttered from the back. That's humanity, someone else corrected. Vulnath pulled up additional data, his hands moving in practiced synchronization across multiple interfaces. Let's review what we know. Human juveniles possess binocular predator vision, capable of tracking fast-moving targets at considerable distance. Their dentition includes pronounced canines designed for gripping and tearing. They have opposable thumbs with remarkable fine motor control. Their pain tolerance is significantly higher than most species in the known galaxy, and their persistence hunting adaptations mean they can maintain activity for extended periods without rest. He paused, letting that sink in. Additionally, he continued, they demonstrate advanced problem-solving capabilities, pack-bonding instincts that create fierce loyalty structures, and what our psychological profiles indicate as a negligible fear response to novel stimuli. In layman's terms, they don't know when to be scared. Jen stood, her three eyes focusing on different sections of the room simultaneously. I've been reviewing comparative xenobiology data. Every species represented on this station has protocols for offspring management. The Quellan keep their young in supervised educational pods until they reach maturity. The Velthians use chemical restraints to limit aggressive impulses during development. The Centaurians employ neural dampeners to prevent their juveniles from accessing their adult strength. She gestured at the screens showing B and Vale. Humans do none of these things. Their child-rearing philosophy appears to be, and again, I'm reading directly from their cultural database, let them explore and learn from experience. Learn from experience? Tool's voice climbed an octave. They let their predator offspring learn through trial and error? On space stations? Around other species? Apparently so, Jen confirmed. Vulnath pulled up his next set of data. Security footage from the past 2 hours. Let's examine what these juveniles have accomplished since their arrival. The first clip showed B scaling the 15-foot sculpture. The assembled officials watched in horrified fascination as the small human moved with surprising agility, finding handholds and footholds on what should have been a smooth, decorative surface. She reached the top in under 90 seconds, then proceeded to hang upside down by her legs while waving at passing aliens. Note the grip strength, Vulnath narrated in the tone of someone documenting a particularly invasive species, and the complete absence of fear response to height. Most species would experience significant distress at that elevation without safety equipment. The second clip showed Vale at the control panel. He'd somehow produced a small tool from his pocket, a toy of some sort shaped like a multi-purpose device, and was using it to manipulate the wiring. Before anyone panics, Vulnath said quickly, as several officials rose from their seats. He didn't damage anything. In fact, he fixed a stuck relay that our maintenance crew has been meaning to address for 3 days. Silence. He fixed it? Someone asked weakly. With a toy, Vulnath confirmed. a toy that appears to be a miniature version of an engineering multi-tool, given to him presumably so he could pretend to do what adult humans do with actual equipment. The third clip showed both children at the vendor stall. They were engaged in what appeared to be enthusiastic negotiations with the Quellan merchant, who looked like they were simultaneously terrified and charmed. Vale was demonstrating how to open a package of something the translator identified as fruit snacks, while B was explaining the concept of trading using a combination of hand gestures and what had to be the most patient repetition of simple words Vulnath had ever witnessed. "They're teaching the merchant about human food-sharing customs," Jen observed. "That's actually quite sophisticated social behavior for juveniles." "It would be sophisticated for adults of some species," Tool added, sounding reluctantly impressed. Vulnath moved to the next section of his presentation. "This brings us to the central question. How has humanity survived? Every evolutionary model suggests that species which don't protect their young during vulnerable developmental stages should face extinction. And yet, humans not only survived, they thrived. They went from a single death world to membership in the Galactic Council in less than 500 cycles." He pulled up what he'd found in the historical archives, the documentation that had kept him awake during his rest cycle, trying to make sense of it all. 20 cycles ago, humanity made first contact with the Council. Initial assessments categorized them as a moderate threat, technologically advanced, diplomatically skilled, but physiologically unremarkable. That assessment lasted approximately 3 months. The view screen shifted to show incident reports, each one more baffling than the last. Incident 1. A human trade delegation survived a station decompression event that should have killed them. They not only survived, they rescued 8 other species from the affected sectors before emergency protocols could activate. Incident 2. Human medical personnel stopped a plague outbreak on a Council research station. The contagion had a 98% mortality rate for most oxygen-breathing species. Humans were completely immune and worked for 60 continuous hours synthesizing a cure. Incident 3. The reactor crisis on this very station. A cascade failure that would have destroyed Unity 9 and everyone aboard. 3 humans, none of them engineers, managed to crawl through superheated maintenance shafts and manually override the safety systems that had malfunctioned. He looked around the room at the assembled officials. In each case, humans did things that should have been impossible. They operated in environmental conditions that would kill most of us within minutes. They worked without rest for periods that would induce fatal exhaustion in other species. And they did it all with what witnesses described as casual competence, as if survival was just something they did between meals. Tool raised a hand. "Security Chief, what does this have to do with the juveniles?" Vulnath's laugh was bitter. "Everything. Because after those incidents, the Council granted humans autonomous clearance. The logic was simple. Trying to restrict them was more dangerous than just letting them handle situations their own way. Humans have a saying, something about forgiveness and permission. They'd rather act and apologize later than wait for bureaucratic approval while people die." "And now," Jen said slowly, understanding dawning across her features, "they're applying that same philosophy to their offspring." "Exactly," Vulnath confirmed. "They raise their young the same way they approach everything else, with calculated risk tolerance that looks like recklessness to everyone else, but somehow produces results." Another official, a Velthian military liaison named Keth, spoke up. "I've reviewed human military doctrine. Their special forces undergo training that would be classified as torture by most civilized standards. Sleep deprivation, extreme environmental exposure, psychological stress testing. We assumed it was because they were preparing for combat. What if, Jen suggested, that's just how they raise all their young? Not the military training specifically, but the underlying philosophy. Expose them to challenges. Let them fail safely. Build resilience through experience rather than protection. The room fell quiet as everyone contemplated the implications of raising an entire species of beings who were essentially trained from birth to handle whatever the universe threw at them. Vulnath pulled up the current tracking data on Bee and Vale. Let me show you what they've been doing while we've been having this meeting. The feeds showed a trail of minor chaos and unexpected positive outcomes. Bee had somehow befriended a group of Quellan younglings by teaching them a human game that involved clapping hands in rhythmic patterns. The Quellan supervisor looked bewildered, but the younglings were clearly having the time of their lives. Their usual reserved behavior replaced with something resembling genuine playfulness. Vale had discovered the station's small botanical garden and was currently explaining to a confused Centaurian botanist why the human name for a particular plant was money tree, even though it didn't produce currency. The botanist was taking notes. Both children had attracted a following. Everywhere they went, curious aliens watched from what they clearly considered a safe distance. Some looked nervous. Others looked fascinated. A few were recording everything on personal devices. They're not causing harm, Toole observed. They're just being children. Active, curious, occasionally rule-bending children. But children nonetheless. Which brings us back to the original problem, Vulnath said. How do we handle this? Our threat assessment says they're dangerous. Our observations say they're mostly harmless. Our protocols say we should restrict them. Our governing AI says we absolutely cannot. Keth, the military liaison, leaned forward. I think we're asking the wrong question. We shouldn't ask how to handle the juveniles. We should ask why humans raise their young this way, and what happens when you try to stop them. Elaborate, Vulnath commanded. Think about it tactically, Keth continued. Humans came from a death world. Resources were scarce, predators were abundant, and survival required constant adaptation. A species that kept their young contained and protected would produce adults who couldn't handle novel threats. But a species that let their young explore, fail, learn, and adapt would produce adults capable of surviving anything. You're suggesting this is evolutionary strategy, Jen said. I'm suggesting it's the most effective survival strategy we've encountered, Keth corrected. Human adults are dangerous because human children are allowed to be dangerous in controlled ways. They learn risk assessment by taking risks. They learn problem solving by encountering problems. They learn social adaptation by interacting with different beings. Vulnath considered this, his multiple eyes reviewing the footage again. And if we interfere? Then we don't just insult their customs, Keth said grimly. We challenge their fundamental approach to species survival. And based on what I know about humans, they don't respond well to threats against their offspring. As if summoned by the discussion, Vulnath's communicator chimed. It was a message from the vendor sector. The Quellan merchant had filed a report, not a complaint, but something listed under notable interactions. The report read, Human juveniles traded small, colorful items called stickers for crystallized nectar pods. Transaction conducted with unexpected sophistication. Juveniles demonstrated understanding of fair trade principles, negotiation tactics, and cultural sensitivity. They also taught me 3 human words, though I'm uncertain if awesome, cool, and rad are genuinely distinct terms or synonyms. Request, More human juveniles should visit the station. They're excellent for business. Vulnath read the report aloud. The room absorbed it in silence. They turned a potential security incident into a positive cultural exchange, Tull said finally. While we've been panicking about threat levels, they've been making friends and conducting informal diplomacy. Just like their father said they would, Jen added. Vulnath's 4 hands dropped to his sides. He felt something shift in his understanding, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place after hours of frustrated effort. We've been approaching this wrong, he admitted. We assess them as threats because our biology says predators are dangerous. But humans aren't dangerous because they're predators. They're successful because they're adaptable. And they're adaptable because they raise their young to be curious, resilient, and socially aware. So what do we do? Someone asked. Vulnath looked at the screens showing 2 human children who were currently engaged in what appeared to be a dance-off with a group of Velthian adolescents in the station's recreational area. The Velthians, normally aggressive and territorial, were laughing. Actually laughing. We do what the AI suggested, Vulnath said. We don't interfere. We observe, we learn, and we accept that humanity operates on principles we don't fully understand, but can't deny are effective. He pulled up the station-wide communication system. All security teams, update protocols regarding human juveniles. Designation: B and Vale, ages 6 standard cycles. Classification: diplomatic guests with autonomous. Clearance: monitor but do not restrict. Allow them access to all public areas. If they appear to be in genuine danger, notify their father immediately, but do not intervene unless specifically requested. He paused, then added, and someone please assign a discreet security detail. Not to guard them. To guard everyone else from having heart failures when they do something that looks dangerous, but apparently isn't. The meeting adjourned with a mixture of relief and lingering unease. Officials filed out, most of them immediately pulling up the tracking feeds on their personal devices to see what the human juveniles would do next. Vulnath remained in the conference room, watching the screens. B and Vale were now helping a maintenance crew move some cargo containers, using teamwork and communication that honestly put some of his trained staff to shame. Jen approached him. You handled that well. I capitulated to circumstances beyond my control, Vulnath corrected. That's not the same as handling something well. It's the same as being smart enough to recognize when your protocols don't account for every variable, Jen said. Humans are a variable we're still learning to account for. On the screen, Vale was showing the maintenance crew a more efficient way to stack the containers. The crew was actually listening. How long until the next transport arrives? Vulnath asked. 6 hours. 6 hours, Vulnath repeated. 6 hours of 2 human juveniles with autonomous clearance roaming my station. What could possibly happen? Jen gave him a look that suggested she'd worked with him long enough to know that question should never be asked aloud. Let's just hope, she said, that whatever happens next is as harmless as what we've seen so far. And in the grand tradition of tempting fate, with hopeful statements, the universe was already preparing to prove that hope was a dangerous thing to have on a space station full of aliens who'd never encountered unsupervised human children. The real test, as it turned out, was just beginning. The universe, as previously established, has a twisted sense of humor, and it was about to deliver the punchline. 3 hours after Vulnath's meeting concluded, while B was teaching a group of Centaurian merchants the concept of rock, paper, scissors, and Vale was helping a confused Quellan technician understand why humans found the number 69 hilarious. the station's proximity alarms began screaming. Not the polite chime of a scheduled arrival, not the moderate alert of an unexpected vessel. This was the full-blown evacuate your posts, someone's about to have a very bad day kind of alarm that made seasoned security personnel check their life insurance policies. Vulnath was back in the security hub within 30 seconds, all four hands already moving across interfaces before his brain fully processed what he was seeing. Unscheduled vessel approaching, his second-in-command reported, voice tight. Configuration matches Mexil Raider class. They're not responding to hails, and they're coming in hot. Mexil, Vulnath's primary heart, sank. The Mexil were exactly the kind of problem you didn't want showing up at your space station. Aggressive, territorial, violent, and completely uninterested in diplomatic niceties. They were space pirates with the moral flexibility of a black hole and the temperament of a cornered predator. Worse, they weren't part of the Galactic Council, which meant the usual protocols, treaties, and mutual agreements meant absolutely nothing to them. How many? Vulnath demanded. Single vessel, but it's a heavy class, estimating 15 to 20 armed hostiles. They're forcing a dock at Bay 23. Bay 23. Vulnath's eyes scanned the station schematic, his mind already calculating evacuation routes, security response positions, and containment strategies. Bay 23 was in the commercial sector, currently populated by approximately 80 civilians from a dozen different species. And according to his tracking display, 2 human juveniles were less than 50 meters from that docking bay, currently in an observation deck overlooking the commercial plaza. Activate lockdown protocols, Vulnath commanded, his voice steady, despite the fact that every one of his hearts was now beating at combat tempo. All civilians to shelters, security teams to defensive positions, and someone get Commander Thomas on the comm now. The security hub erupted into controlled chaos. Alarms blared throughout the station. Blast doors began sliding into position. Security personnel grabbed weapons and body armor, moving with the practiced efficiency of beings who'd trained for exactly this scenario and hoped they'd never have to use that training. Thomas's face appeared on the communication screen, and his expression was unnervingly calm for someone whose offspring were potentially about to encounter space pirates. "Commander, we have a hostile incursion," Vulnath said rapidly. "Mexil Raiders forcing entry at Bay 23. Your children are in the observation deck adjacent to that location. I'm sending a security team to—" "Where are B and Vale exactly?" Thomas interrupted. "Observation deck, Section 9, Level 12. Less than 50 meters from the incursion point. Commander, I need you to understand the severity." "They'll be fine," Thomas said, and there was something in his tone that made Vulnath's scales prickle with unease. Not worry, not panic. Something else entirely. "Fine?" Vulnath's voice climbed an octave. "Commander, these are armed hostiles with a documented history of violence. Your offspring are 6 cycles old and directly in their path." "I heard you the first time," Thomas replied, his calmness bordering on eerie. "Keep everyone else safe. The kids know what to do." "What they know what to do? They're children." But Thomas had already switched his comm to direct contact with his offspring. Vulnath pulled up the observation deck feed, watching in mounting horror as the docking bay doors overrode and the Mexil vessel attached with the subtlety of a meteor impact. The Mexil themselves were exactly as unpleasant as their reputation suggested. Bipedal, heavily muscled, with armored hide and multiple limbs ending in claws designed for combat. They moved like predators, weapons held with casual confidence, and their leader, distinguishable by more elaborate armor, barked orders in a language the universal translator rendered as various threats and profanities. They stormed into the commercial sector with the kind of aggressive swagger that came from beings who'd never encountered meaningful resistance. Civilians scattered. Security personnel took defensive positions but held fire, waiting for Volnath's command. And in the observation deck, visible through the transparent aluminum viewport, two small human children stood perfectly still, watching the chaos unfold below. Volnath zoomed in on their faces, expecting terror, tears, panic. What he saw instead made his blood run cold in ways that had nothing to do with temperature. Bee and Vale were smiling. Not the innocent smile of children who didn't understand danger. Not the nervous smile of beings trying to mask fear. They were smiling like predators who'd just spotted prey. What happened next would be discussed in galactic security training seminars for the next 20 cycles, analyzed by xenopsychologists, and generally regarded as the moment everyone realized that human children were perhaps the most terrifying force in known space. The Mexil leader, a particularly nasty specimen named Grex Thor, spotted the observation deck, spotted the two small figures standing there, and made the catastrophic decision that they looked like easy hostages. He and three of his raiders diverted from their main group, weapons raised, moving toward the deck access with the confidence of beings who'd terrorized countless stations and never faced real consequences. They reached the observation deck. The door slid open. Bee looked at Vale. Vale looked at Bee. Then they did something that would haunt Grex Thor's nightmares for whatever remained of his criminal career. They laughed. Not scared laughter, not nervous laughter. Pure, delighted, high-pitched human juvenile laughter that hit some primal frequency in the Mexil nervous system and triggered every evolutionary alarm their species possessed. Because here's what nobody outside humanity really understood. Human children don't just play. They play fight. They play hunt. They turn everything, including genuine danger, into a game. And that laughter, that sound of pure joy in the face of threat, signals something deeply wrong to any species with functional survival instincts. It says, "I'm not afraid of you. I think this is fun." Bee reached into her pocket and pulled out her toy, a small stuffed creature she called Mr. Flopsy, which was apparently some earth animal called a rabbit. She held it up, examined it thoughtfully, then threw it directly at Grex Thor's face. The toy bounced harmlessly off his armored snout. The psychological impact was devastating. Vale, not to be outdone, let out what he probably thought was a fierce roar, but came out as an adorable growl, and charged. Not away from the armed pirates, toward them. A 6-cycle-old human, maybe 3 feet tall, running full speed at a group of heavily armed raiders while making monster noises. Grex Thor's threat assessment system, honed by decades of violence, completely short-circuited. Nothing in his experience prepared him for prey that acted like this. His species understood fear. They understood aggression. They understood the normal predator-prey dynamics of the universe. They did not understand human children treating an armed confrontation like it was the best playground game ever invented. "What is wrong with them?" one of the raiders hissed in their native tongue. Vale reached Grex Thor and kicked him in the shin. It probably felt like being attacked by a particularly determined pillow. But the sheer audacity, the complete absence of survival instinct, the pure, chaotic energy radiating from these tiny creatures broke something fundamental in the Mexil worldview. Bee, meanwhile, had started chasing another raider, arms outstretched, making exaggerated grabbing motions. "Tag! You're it!" The raider backed up, then backed up faster, then turned and ran. A Mexil pirate, veteran of countless raids, fled from a 6-cycle-old human girl playing tag. From the security hub, Volnath watched in absolute silence. His 4 hands hung uselessly at his sides. His 6 eyes were locked on the screens. His 3 hearts had given up trying to maintain regular rhythm and were just doing whatever felt right in the moment. Jen stood beside him, equally speechless. "Are we," she finally managed, "witnessing human juveniles repelling an armed incursion through play behavior?" "Yes," Volnath whispered. "Yes, we are." Grexthor made one last attempt to salvage the situation. He raised his weapon, trying to look threatening, trying to reassert dominance, trying to make these tiny creatures understand that he was dangerous. Bee and Vale looked at the weapon, looked at each other, and simultaneously stuck their tongues out at him while making a sound the translator interpreted as "pa-pa-pa-ta." That did it. Grexthor's nerve broke completely. He backed toward the door, weapon still raised but his body language screaming retreat. His raiders were already halfway down the corridor, their aggressive swagger replaced with something that looked suspiciously like panic. "Fall back!" Grexthor commanded, trying to make it sound tactical rather than terrified. "This station is defended by... He couldn't finish the sentence. "How do you explain that you're retreating from children?" The Mexil raiders withdrew to their vessel with considerably more haste than they'd arrived. Volnath's security teams didn't even need to fire a shot. They just watched, weapons ready, as the pirates practically tripped over themselves getting back to their ship. The vessel detached and burned away from Unity 9 at maximum acceleration, leaving behind a station full of very confused aliens and 2 human children, who were now disappointed the game had ended so quickly. "That wasn't very fun," Vale complained to his sister. "They gave up too fast." "Maybe next time we'll get better players," Bee replied philosophically. Thomas arrived at the observation deck moments later, slightly out of breath, but otherwise composed. He looked at his children, who were now sitting on the floor sharing a snack pack like nothing unusual had happened. "Everyone okay?" he asked casually. "We're fine, Dad," Bee said between bites. "Some weird aliens came in, but they didn't want to play. They just left." "Didn't even say goodbye," Vale added, sounding genuinely offended by the breach of etiquette. Thomas ruffled both their heads affectionately. "Well, that's rude of them. Come on, let's go find you some actual lunch. I think you've had enough excitement for one morning." As they left the observation deck, hand in hand with their father, Volnath finally found his voice. "That," he said slowly, his 4 hands gesturing helplessly at the empty screens, "is why humans were given autonomous clearance." "Because their children weaponize playtime?" Jen asked. "Because nothing in the galaxy is prepared for them," Volnath corrected. "Not us, not pirates, not anyone."